Chapter 1371. It was them. Our neighbors saw it with their own eyes. Lisa shouted while tears fell from her eyes. He asked for money from Mom. She refused to give it to him, so he did that to her. Mr. Fraser looked at her silently. He stood there for a while, before heading out to the hospital. While looking at the door as it slowly closed, Lisa's mind was filled with her father's expression. He doesn't believe me. When the thought surfaced in her head, she flung the cup on the table to the floor. The next day, Daisy and Colton came to look for Lisa. She knocked on the door for a long while, but no one opened the door. She turned her head around to look at Colton and asked, "Brother, is Lisa not home?" "No idea." "I guess so." Colton turned around. "Let's go then." Daisy nodded. Initially, she wanted to check on Lisa. However, it seemed to her that Lisa was not at home, so she decided to look for her when she came to school. When Daisy and Colton arrived at the district, they ran into Lisa's father. "Sir. I'm Daisy. Is Lisa not home?" Mr. Fraser was dumbfounded. "I guess she went out." After Mr. Fraser went back into the building, Daisy lowered her head and said, "Colton, I'm worried about Lisa." Colton walked up to her and replied, "There's nothing to worry about. She'll be fine. I'm sure she'll come to school in another few days." After that, Daisy and Colton left the district. When Mr. Fraser arrived at his home, he pushed the door to Lisa's room open. He thought Lisa was not in the room, but when he saw Lisa was sleeping on her side under the blanket, he quietly closed the door and left. However, he did not know that Lisa had been awake. Her eyes were wide open as she stared out the window gloomily. She could hear all the knocks on the door when Daisy came to look for her. It was just that she pretended that she was not at home as she did not want to see anyone right now. 2 days later, Lisa finally returned to school. When Daisy learned she was back, she went looking for her. She stood in the corridor and waited for Lisa. When Lisa emerged from the classroom, she went up to her with a smile on her face. "Lisa, are you okay? I'm worried about you." Lisa shook her head. "I'm alright. I went to look for you with Colton the other day, but you were not home," Daisy said as a smile broke across her face. "Well, I'm relieved that you're fine." Lisa did not say anything in return. Suddenly, Daisy thought of something and pulled a simple shell bracelet out of her pocket. "This is a shell bracelet I made for you myself. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever made a gift for you myself, and this is the first time." Lisa was stunned. "Let me put it on for you." Daisy helped her to put on the shell bracelet. "All done. Look, it fits you perfectly." Touching the shell bracelet on her wrist, Lisa raised her head and said, "Thank you, Daisy." After Lisa had returned to the classroom, she looked at the shell bracelet on her wrist and removed it. She threw it outside the window and continued to read her book as if nothing had happened. At Bassburg Airport, Tanner was holding Noah with one arm while holding Pearl's baggage with another. Pearl was following beside him. The driver had been waiting for him at the exit, and he helped them to put their baggage into the car. This was the first time Noah had traveled to a distant place, so he was a little bit scared. He latched himself on Tanner's chest and held his neck tightly. After getting into the car, Pearl took him from Tanner's arms. Noah lifted his head and asked, "Mommy, where are Grandpa Antonio and Grandma Kamala?" Pearl caressed his head and looked outside through the window. "Grandpa Antonio and Grandma Kamala aren't coming with us. They'll come to visit you in the future." Tanner wrapped his arm around Pearl's shoulder and said, "That's right. They'll come to visit you when they're free. From now onward, your other grandparents will look after you." Noah turned his head to look at him. "Then will Grandpa and Grandma like me?" Chapter 1372. Tanner smiled at him and said, "They will." Soon, they arrived at the Hannigan Manor. Tanner had informed them about their arrival, so Nathaniel and Mrs. Hannigan had been waiting for them in the living room. When they saw a woman and a kid walking into the living room with Tanner, both of them found it hard to believe it. Holding Noah's hand, Tanner led Pearl up to them. "Dad, I brought your grandson and Pearl back to you." Noah subconsciously hid behind Tanner's leg and poked half of his head out to look at the two people in front of him. Mrs. Hannigan's heart melted upon seeing how adorable Noah was. "Kid, come over here and let me take a look." Pearl squatted down and said something to Noah before he walked toward Mrs. Hannigan hesitantly. Mrs. Hannigan ran her hand over his head and said with a smile, "What a good kid." She then lifted her head to look at Pearl and said, "Pearl, it must have been hard on you." Pearl was momentarily stunned before shaking her head. Standing up with the help of a cane, Nathaniel said, "Since you're back, I'll go inform the servants to get the dinner ready. Honey, you sit down." Mrs. Hannigan stood up and pushed her husband back to his seat. "I'll do it. You stay here and play with our grandson." But honestly, it was exactly because Nathaniel did not know how to interact with kids that he wanted to go away. It was just that he did not expect his wife to see through his intention and push him back down. Noah looked at Nathaniel. His eyes were bright and clear, as if there were stars in them. Nathaniel liked the kid very much. Just when he was thinking about how to talk to the kid, he saw the fruit on the table. He took an apple and handed it to Noah. Noah hesitated for a while before walking over and taking the apple. Before returning to Pearl, he said, "Thank you, Grandpa." After that, he ran toward Pearl and threw himself into her arms. Nathaniel was delighted when Noah called him Grandpa. After having dinner, Pearl took Noah for a walk in the courtyard while Tanner looked at them from the balcony on the second floor. Mrs. Hannigan walked to him and said, "Tan." She looked downstairs and continued, "Has Pearl said yes to marry you?" Something flickered in Tanner's eyes as he parted his lips open. "Not yet. She hasn't said yes yet." Mrs. Hannigan sighed. "Your father is old, and his health is deteriorating day by day. The future of the Hannigan is on your shoulders, and I'm sure your father is very happy that you have a son. Since she's willing to bring the kid back with you, you'll have to treat her well." "I know," Tanner replied as he gazed at Pearl. "I'll treat her well." At Seoul. In the reception room, Edward came to request Maisie to step in and persuade his daughter to go home. Maisie knew what had happened that day, so she lifted her head when she heard his request and asked, "Mr. Xavier, can I ask you something?" Edward was stumped for a moment, and he nodded. "Yeah, sure. Miss Xavier is your daughter, and I'm sure you know her capability more than anyone else. Generally speaking, she's one of the people who has contributed plenty to Beyond Technology. Also, she's your daughter, so why don't you want to pass the company to her?" Edward felt awkward when he heard Maisie's question. "Mrs. Goldman, yes, it's true that Elaine is my daughter, but I don't want her to become too independent. Running a company is something a man should do. A woman like her doesn't have to work so hard. I'm just doing it for her own good." "Yes, I know you're doing it for her own good, but you don't understand what kind of lifestyle your daughter wants." While Edward was stunned, Maisie continued calmly. "Miss Xavier has her own life goal and dream. She just doesn't want to choose an ordinary life like most people do. Besides, you've underestimated your daughter. After all, an excellent woman is not inferior to a man." Chapter 1373. Edward kept his head low and fell silent. When he came out of the reception room, he ran into Lucy and was stunned. "What are you doing here?" Lucy did not expect to run into her stepfather here at all. At the same time, Maisie emerged from the reception room. When she saw Edward talking to Lucy, she felt strange. "Mr. Xavier, do you know Lucy?" Before Edward could reply, Lucy said, "Uncle Edward, I'm working at Seoul right now." Edward nodded. "I see. So, you've been working at Seoul the whole time?" "Yeah," Lucy replied. Maisie walked up to Edward and looked at Lucy. "Are you Lucy's relative, Mr. Xavier?" Now that Maisie thought of it, Lucy's surname was Xavier as well. Edward did not reply instantly. After a short while, he smiled and said, "She's my wife's daughter." A hint of surprise flitted across Lucy's eyes. This was the first time he introduced her in front of other people. Everyone knew that he had married a second time, and wasn't the daughter of his second wife also considered his daughter? After Edward left, Lucy followed Maisie back into the office. Maisie sat on the couch and rested her chin on her hands as she looked at her. "So, Mrs. Xavier is your mother?" Lucy nodded and replied with a pout, "My mother married into the Xaviers, but my stepfather doesn't allow me to reveal my identity." That was the reason nobody knew about Lucy's family status. All of them thought that she was just a normal girl from a normal family, seeing how hardworking she was. Truth be told, she was born into a normal family. Her mother was a teacher, and her father was a worker at a construction site. However, her father came across an accident on the construction site and passed away when she was still a kid. After that, her mother came across her stepfather, Edward Xavier. Edward did not mind marrying her mother, despite her having a daughter, because he liked her mother's gentleness and kindness. Although Lucy had taken on her stepfather's surname, she couldn't tell anyone she was his daughter. For her, the Xavier mansion was not her house. Lucy did not like being at other people's mercy, so she moved out to live independently after graduation. Maisie got up and walked to her. She placed her hand on her shoulder and asked, "How about your relationship with Elaine?" Lucy pressed her lips thin and replied, "Eli. She doesn't like us. She is sharp-tongued, but she's actually tender-hearted. She hasn't been home lately and is staying at my place. She hasn't found a new job yet." After that, she paused for a few seconds before continuing. "She refuses to listen to me as well. Honestly, Eli just wants recognition from her father." Maisie chuckled and said, "I'm not asking you to persuade her. When a stubborn person is determined to do something, nothing can stop them. Miss Vanderbilt, I want to help Eli." "How do you want to help her?" Maisie lifted her eyebrows. Lucy thought for a while before saying, "With her ability, she will shine in any company. If she can work in one of the 3 major IT companies under black gold, won't she impress my stepfather?" Maisie rested her chin on her hand and looked at Lucy. "So, you want to introduce her to one of the IT companies under black gold?" Lucy nodded truthfully. She lowered her eyelids and continued. "If she goes to another company, there's a possibility that my stepfather will request them to reject her. However, things will be different if she works under black gold. Beyond Technology is working with black gold, so if a company under black gold accepts Eli, my stepfather won't be able to do anything to her." Chapter 1374. Maisie couldn't help herself and chuckled. "You've even considered your stepfather's actions. It seems like you really want to help her." Honestly, Maisie was kind of envious that Lucy was willing to help Elaine even though they were not related by blood, and she couldn't help but think of Willow. Willow wasn't born a bad person. They were related by blood, and Maisie still remembered the day Willow came to her house with Layla for the first time. Willow was slightly taller than Maisie, and she combed her hair into 2 braids. She looked shy and bashful. Stephen pushed her forward and introduced her to Maisie. Willow will be your older sister from now onward." Maisie looked at Willow with a slight hostility. After all, her mother had only passed away for less than a year, and her father had found her a stepmother. What's more, this stepmother had brought back an older sister for her too. She did not like them at all, so she turned around and ran upstairs. Since then, Willow did not dare to talk to her, and she behaved carefully in their house. However, Maisie knew that Willow wanted to play with her. Kids were not as complicated as adults, and after getting to know Willow, she slowly warmed up to her and would bring her out to play from time to time. One thing that impressed Maisie the most was that they returned late one day, and Layla did not have the guts to punish Maisie. Thus, she beat up Willow. It was also that day that Willow started to avoid her. As time went by, Willow seemed to have changed into another person. She had learned how to please her father and became vain. Maisie did not understand it in the past, but now she finally knew that parenting was important. "Miss Vanderbilt?" Lucy's voice snapped Maisie back to reality. "Yeah?" Lucy scratched her cheek and said, "If you think it's okay, I'll tell Eli when I go home and ask her to prepare her resume." Maisie smiled and flipped through her document. Let's see which company under Black Gold she wants to join. In the afternoon, at the Lakeview apartment, Elaine stood on the balcony and talked to Lucy on the phone. When Lucy told her something, she was stunned. What? You'll introduce me to one of the companies under Black Gold? Yes. Lucy replied, with your ability, I'm sure you'll shine if you join one of the companies under Black Gold. Elaine massaged her nose and said helplessly, why are you poking your nose in this? It has nothing to do with you where I'm going to work, right? I don't care if you want to go or not. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I need to return to my workstation. Lucy hung up the call before Elaine could say anything. Elaine looked at her phone and did not know if she should get angry at Lucy or not. How dare she hang up on me? However, there was no angry expression on her face. Just when she was about to turn around and go into the room, she heard someone opening boxes from next door. The apartment next door had not been occupied, and it seemed like someone had moved in. At the private middle and high school, the bodyguards were waiting for Colton and Daisy at the school entrance. Daisy wanted to bring Lisa along, but she couldn't find Lisa in her classroom. After getting into the car, Daisy began to talk non-stop like a chirping little bird. Colton leaned against the window with one hand on the corner of his forehead while giving her some responses from time to time. Suddenly, his gaze caught the shell bracelet on Daisy's wrist, and he asked, "You know how to make a bracelet now?" "Of course. Our mom is a jewelry designer, so of course, I'd inherit some of her talents as well." Daisy was in a good mood, so she stopped arguing with Colton. Colton clicked his tongue as he looked at the things outside through the window. "Do you really trust Lisa completely?" "Why shouldn't I?" Daisy did not know why Colton suddenly brought things like this up. She looked at Colton, but he said nothing. He felt it was useless to tell her anything. There was a possibility that it would backfire and that she would cry. Chapter 1375. No one knew his sister more than he did, so after a short while of contemplation, he decided not to tell her anything. Meanwhile, Evan was discharged from the hospital, and Mr. Fraser went to pick him up. After returning home, Mr. Fraser told him to stop causing trouble outside. Evan replied half-heartedly. He had been beaten up for no reason, so it went without saying that he wouldn't stomach an insult like that. When Lisa returned from school, her expression changed upon seeing her brother playing games on the couch. She did not greet him and went into her room without saying anything. She slammed the door shut, and Mr. Fraser, preparing food in the kitchen, turned his head around. He knew her mother's death had left a big impact on her. However, he had asked the police about the incident, and it had nothing to do with Evan at all. Evan owed a group of people some money, and they had a fight with Mrs. Fraser when they came to their house to look for him. An accident had happened, and they ran away in fear. Mrs. Fraser had lost too much blood, and she was beyond saving by the time she was rushed to the hospital. He was devastated by the death of his wife as well, and he blamed himself for not educating his son properly. His wife had died, but life continued. He just hoped that his son would realize his mistake after this incident and return to his family to turn a new leaf. The next day, Daisy and Lisa went to the library to borrow some books. Their school library was massive. It had an area of 2 or 3 basketball courts and was divided into different areas. The junior high school department was located in a different area from the senior high school department. When Lisa was looking for a book in front of a shelf, Daisy did not see the shell bracelet on her wrist and asked, "Lisa, where's your bracelet? You didn't wear it?" Lisa was stumped for a moment. A hint of expression crossed her face, and then she offered Daisy a smile. "I'm scared I'll lose it, so I keep it at home." Daisy believed her and said, "It's fine if you lose it. I can make a new one for you. I don't want to trouble you," she replied with a smile. "We're friends, and you can trouble me whenever you want." Daisy stood at the tip of her toe as she tried to take the book on the shelf. She couldn't reach the book no matter how hard she tried, and in the next second, someone took the book. She was stunned and turned her head around to see Zephyr standing behind her. "It's you?" Zephyr handed the book to her and said, "Here." "Thank you, Zeph." She took the book. "What are you doing in this library?" Zephyr replied with a smile on his face, "I came here with my friends, and I saw you two were here." After 3 years, Zephyr was already a student in the first year of high school, and he was 3 years older than her. The once bashful and energetic boy had become a good-looking senior that every girl in school sought after. When one went around the school and asked about Zephyr, they would find out that he was one of the most popular figures in the school and the current hunk in the senior high school department. Zeph. His friends were members of the basketball club in the senior high school department. When they saw Zephyr talking to Daisy, they approached them with smiles and said, "Oh my, if it isn't Daisy from the junior high school department." "You know me?" Daisy asked. One of them put their arm on the shoulder of the person next to him and chuckled. "Of course. You read that little angel that Zeph is always talking about." They were Zephyr good friends, and they knew about Daisy through Zephyr. However, she felt a little bit awkward when she learned that Zephyr had been calling her little angel. She felt it was normal if they were in elementary school, but all of them had grown up now, and she felt the nickname was embarrassing. Zephyr turned his head to warn his friends. "Stop talking nonsense." They both smiled and did not say anything. Suddenly, they thought of something and asked, "Oh yeah, Daisy, do you want to come and see the basketball game in the senior high school department? Zeph is going to play as well." Daisy frowned. "Can we go watch?" "Of course, you can. The high school basketball tournament is open to the whole school, and all of you in the junior high school department can come." You don't know about that? Chapter 1376. Daisy really didn't know. The boy smiled and said, "There'll be a lot of spectators. If you want to come, we'll keep a seat for you, and it's going to be a great seat." Zephyr looked toward Daisy. Daisy held Lisa's hand. "Can I come with Lisa?" The boy was planning to invite Daisy, and he knew who he was asking on behalf of, but when he saw that Daisy wanted to bring her friend along, he hesitated. Lisa noticed something, so she pushed Daisy's hand away and smiled. "Daisy, you go ahead. I might have something on that day, then I..." "Daisy, please come," he asked sincerely. Daisy didn't want to say no, so she agreed. After leaving the library, Zephyr and the two friends walked next to Daisy as if they were protecting her. Lisa walked behind them. Everyone was having fun talking to each other, but she couldn't blend in. When she was spending time with Daisy, it was as if a gem was trying to blend in with mud. Daisy would always shine bright. Since she was born in a good family, worked with Helios, and was pretty, there was no doubt people liked her. Everyone had been treating her nicely since elementary school, and she was born to be untouchable. However, Lisa had nothing. She was like a leaf who would compliment Daisy the flower. Even if she wanted to get attention, she could never be as beautiful as a flower. Lisa and Daisy split up in the corridor. After Daisy went into her classroom, Lisa turned around and saw Colton standing not too far away. She was surprised, then smiled and greeted him. "Colton, did you come to see Daisy?" She was pretty close to Colton when they were in primary school, but she knew it was because she was friends with Daisy. Colton only had his sister in mind, and when he spoke to Lisa, it was to ask about his sister. Colton had his hands in his pockets and was quiet. Lisa continued. "By the way, Zephyr asked Daisy to go watch a basketball match with him, and she agreed." Colton didn't know if she was intentionally telling him that, so he frowned. "I'm curious if you really see Daisy as a friend." Lisa's smile faded. Colton looked away toward the windows. "I noticed that you've changed a lot." Lisa's fingers curled. I didn't." He looked back, then shrugged. "I hope so too." Before Lisa could reply, he took out the seashell bracelet she had thrown away out of his pocket. "This looks very familiar." My sister gave it to you. Lisa's face turned pale, and she didn't say anything. She had thrown away the bracelet because she didn't want it. She hadn't been feeling great that day because she felt that Daisy couldn't understand her feelings and just kept giving her gifts as if she was feeling sorry for her. If you don't want the presents, you can say no. He put the bracelet away. If you accept it, you can't just throw it away no matter if you like it or not. Lisa bit her lip and remained silent. Colton walked past her. I won't tell her about this. She trusts you a lot, so I don't wish to see your actions hurting her. If you don't appreciate this friendship, stop talking to her. Lisa stood there until Colton left. At the Lakeview apartment, Elaine returned with Lucy's car after the interview and finally found a parking spot, but since it was too narrow, she couldn't get it. Chapter 1377. Elaine was thinking about what she should do when a man in another car got out. He was wearing a business suit that looked simple and clean, brown slacks, and had a briefcase in hand. He looked amazing. She had never seen a man look so good with such short hair, but it looked perfect on him. She rolled down her window. Sir. Hector paused. Are you talking to me? Elaine smiled and opened the door. I'm sorry, I can't get my car in. Can you help me, please? Hector looked at her car, which was blocked. He could tell she was too close and didn't notice the distance, which was why she was stuck. He nodded. I'll give it a go. Elaine moved over. Thanks so much. He got into the car, adjusted the seat, slowly reversed the car, and adjusted the steering wheel. In less than 10 minutes, he managed to park the car. He took out the keys and handed them to her. Done. Elaine took the keys and smiled. Thank you so much. Hector smiled. Don't worry about it. Elaine was surprised when he walked into the building, so she caught up. Do you live here too? Yes, I just moved in recently. Oh. They entered the elevator, and Elaine paused when she saw the floor he was going to. Hector looked at her. Which floor are you on? She smiled. The same as you. Hector didn't say anything after that. When they got to the 12th floor, they walked out together, and Elaine slowed her steps until she saw he was going to the unit next to hers. Hector took out his keys and unlocked his door when he heard Elaine's voice. What a coincidence, you're my new neighbor. Hector paused, turned to look at her, and chuckled. That really is a coincidence. By the way, thanks for helping me park the car. Let me cook you a dinner. Hector hesitated. I don't think that's a good idea. Elaine understood. They were strangers, and it wouldn't be too nice, so she explained, I live with my sister. Hector paused. Let's play by ear. In the evening, Lucy bought some groceries home when she returned from work because Elaine had asked her to. When she got into their apartment, she saw Elaine tidying up the living room and frowned. What's happening? You asked me to get groceries and tidied up the living room. Are we expecting guests? Of course, why else would I ask you to get groceries? Elaine cleaned up the living room and sat on the couch. That's so tiring. Let's hire a cleaner. Lucy placed the groceries on the table and tossed her bag onto the couch. Are you going to help me pay for that? Elaine placed the bag neatly. Don't mess it up. We have a hot guy living next door who's about your age. He looks great, and I'm guessing that he's single. He helped me park my car, and I invited him for dinner. We can't show him a messy place as a first impression, can we? Lucy ignored her, took the groceries into the kitchen, and started unpacking. Elaine went close to her. I'm helping you. You better act properly. Helping me? Lucy looked at her. She looked serious. To find a match. Lucy was rendered speechless as she pushed her out. Go away. You should look for one yourself. Elaine leaned against the fridge. I'm a career woman. Dating isn't something on my mind at this age. Chapter 1378. Lucy ignored Elaine. When she was done cooking dinner, Elaine seized the moment and quickly ran next door and knocked on the door. It took a long time before Hector finally opened the door. He seemed to have just come out of the shower as he smelled of very fresh soap. He had casually put on a loose lounge t-shirt and pants before coming out to answer the door. "Sorry to keep you waiting." "It's fine. Do you live alone?" Elaine peeked into the house upon saying that. Sure enough, it looked like he lived alone. The living room was spacious and clean. There were no women's shoes on the shoe rack. Hector hesitated. "About dinner, I think." Elaine didn't give him a chance to refuse and quickly dragged him out. "I asked my sister to make an extra portion for dinner tonight. It will be a waste if you don't come to join us." Thus, Hector was forcefully brought next door. When Lucy heard the commotion outside the door, she looked up and met Hector's gaze. She almost lost her grip on her fork. Elaine did not notice Lucy's shock. She smiled and introduced her sister to Hector. "This is my sister, Lucy." Hector looked at Lucy. "You live here?" Yeah." Lucy nodded, startled. Elaine looked at them and realized something was amiss. Surprised, she asked, "You know each other?" The three of them sat at the dining table. Only then did Elaine find out Lucy and Hector were colleagues 3 years ago. What a small world. To have been colleagues 3 years ago and end up as neighbors 3 years later after not keeping in contact with one another. That was fate. There was an awkward silence in the room. Lucy nibbled her fork and broke the silence. "When did you get back?" Elaine looked at him. Hector smiled and said, "This week." Lucy asked again, "Does Miss Vanderbilt know?" He grunted. "I haven't told her." With that, Lucy didn't ask any more questions. Elaine kicked her foot under the table, causing Lucy to frown and look in her direction. Elaine shot her a look that said, "Is that all we're talking about?" Lucy shifted her foot away. Although she and Hector were once colleagues, that was 3 years ago. Moreover, they had not contacted each other for 3 years. How could she have the nerve to pry into any more of his life's details than that? Did Elaine want her to ask about his bank account details as well? They proceeded to eat in silence. When Lucy reached out to fork a pork rib from the sharing platter, Hector just so happened to have targeted the same rib. The two of them paused midway and looked up at each other. Then, they both pulled back their forks and said in unison, "You first." As an unwilling participant in such an awkward situation, Elaine simply butted in and took away the pork rib. "If you guys won't eat it, I will." Suddenly, Lucy's cell phone rang. She checked the caller ID, but before she could answer, Elaine snatched the phone from her and saw it was her mother. "I'll answer it." "Hey, you." Before Lucy could finish, Elaine walked to the balcony to answer the call. Hector looked up at her. "You're still working at my cousin's company, right?" Lucy looked away and scratched her cheek with a smile. "Ah, right. I'm still working there." Then she added, "The benefits Miss Vanderbilt gives are quite good. The main thing is that she's a good person. I've never met a boss like her." "That's right." Hector lowered his eyes and did not deny it. "There's no doubt about that. She's really good. Miss Vanderbilt will be very happy to know you're back," Lucy said as she placed the pork ribs on her plate. He laughed out loud. "Let's hope so." After dinner, Hector returned to his apartment. As Lucy cleared the table, Elaine walked over with a glass of water and leaned close to her. "You like him?" Lucy paused and looked up. "Who said that?" "You don't like him?" "That's a pity. I'm sure many girls like a handsome man like him." Elaine slowly drank the water and studied her sister's reaction. "If you don't take action soon, other women might snatch him away." Chapter 1379. Lucy rolled her eyes. "You don't do anything around here, but you sure talk the most." Then, she took the dishes to the kitchen. Elaine tooted, put on her headphones, and returned to her room. Night approached. Rain poured down across the city, blurring the neon lights of the streets. The lights in the room were warm and yellow. Pearl stood in front of the window. The raindrops pelted against the window like curtain layers. Tanner pushed open the door and walked toward her, hugging her from behind. "Why are you standing in front of the window?" She looked through the glass at the blurry figure of Tanner. "I love rainy days." He snuggled himself against the side of her neck and laughed huskily. "Is that so?" Pearl's eyelashes fluttered. "Because rain can wash away all sorts of dirty things." Tanner turned her around and cupped her cheek in his palm. "Do you know about moss?" Pearl looked at him, and Tanner smiled and chuckled. "Yes," he said, "moss may be a low-level plant. It's not as dazzling as flowers and likes to inhabit dark, damp places, but it never loses the courage to grow. Even if the warm spring sun can't reach the dorsum, it still remains very much alive. It's still green. Although it's as small as a grain of rice, it doesn't stop it from blooming passionately like a graceful and charming peony." Pearl pursed her lips and stared at him. Tanner rubbed her face with his fingertips. "Do you know when you're most dazzling?" She winced. "When?" "When you don't lose yourself." Tanner hugged her and rested his chin on the top of her head. "No matter what others say about you." Pearl sank into his arms. The warmth that enveloped her melted her cold heart. "Mommy." Noah appeared in the bedroom doorway, holding a pillow, as he rubbed his eyes. Pearl gently pushed Tanner away and walked toward Noah. She squatted down and said, "Noah, why are you awake?" Noah hugged her. "There's thunder when it rains. I don't dare sleep alone." Pearl turned to look at Tanner, who smiled. "No, can sleep with us tonight." Tanner went forward and picked up Noah. Noah hugged his neck and asked childishly, "Does Daddy know how to tell stories?" "Yes." Tanner kissed his forehead. "Do you want to hear a story?" Noah nodded. Tanner then carried him to the bed and told him a bedtime fairy tale. As Pearl watched both father and son, a smile appeared on her lips. As the clock ticked deeper into the night, the rain gradually lessened. After Tanner finished telling the story, he closed the storybook and turned to look at Noah and Pearl beside him. Both mother and son were asleep. He set the storybook on the bedside table, tucked them in, and rolled to his side. Noah slept between them. He wrapped his arms around them both and smiled tightly. "Good night." The next day, Lucy was just leaving the house when she bumped into Hector. She greeted him with a smile. "Morning. Are you going out too?" Hector closed the door and turned to her. "Yes, I'm going to stop by my cousin's office." She slung her bag over her shoulder. "Then we're going the same way." She stepped into the elevator with Hector and pressed the button for the first floor. She turned and glanced at Hector. "Do you have any plans when you're done?" Hector answered, "I'll probably work on some makeup design at an entertainment company." Lucy was surprised. "Makeup design for celebrities, huh?" He laughed a little. "Something like that." The two of them walked out of the elevator, and Lucy said excitedly beside him, "That sounds amazing. You'll get to know many celebrities. Who knows, you might even become a stylist for A-list celebrities. The salary will definitely be handsome." Chapter 1380. Since celebrities made a lot of money, the salary of their personal stylists would definitely be quite substantial. Moreover, if the stylist's design was uncommon and amazing, they might even become a popular brand. With that, a stylist could decide how much they wanted to charge for their services. It was the equivalent of someone paying you for your services, yet you would still be able to specify the price for your services. Hector laughed. "Sounds like you're desperate for money." "Of course. Who isn't?" Lucy said matter-of-factly. "Workers like us working in first-class cities have to work out asses off to make money." He nodded. "True." Soon, they arrived at his car. He stopped and looked at Lucy. Do you need a ride over? No, thanks. I can drive myself. She rummaged in her purse for her car keys, felt for them, and frowned. Hey, where are my keys? Lucy continued searching. She remembered putting her car keys in her bag last night. Lucy. They heard Elaine shouting from 12 floors up. They looked up to see her standing on the balcony, looking down. I'm going to use your car today. I've got your keys. You figure out how to get to the office, all right. With that, she proudly pocketed the car keys and returned to the apartment. Fuming, Lucy held herself back from cursing. She took a deep breath and looked awkwardly at Hector. In that case, yes, please. I'll have to trouble you to drive me to the office. Soon after, they arrived. Hector parked in front of the Souls branch office. Lucy got out and waved toward Hector, who was in the car. I'll go in now. You take care and drive slowly. He pursed his lips and smiled as he watched her enter the building. Then he turned around and drove in the direction of Soul's office. Maisie was sitting in her office reading documents when Sadie knocked on the door and walked in. Ma'am. Maisie looked up to see Hector coming in behind Sadie. She put the file down and stood up. Hector, you're back in the country? Sadie backed out, closing the door behind her. Hector smiled and said, Yeah, I'm back. Maisie walked up to him and held his chin as she sized him up. Not bad. It seems that sending you overseas to further your studies was the right choice. Hector was wearing a light blue suit with a black turtleneck and dark trousers. He looked like a casual businessman, simple and efficient. Maisie walked to the sofa and sat down. She poured 2 cups of tea and waited for him to sit down. Does your father know that you're back? He nodded. I told him. About Linda. Maisie frowned. I'm sorry, I couldn't persuade her. He picked up his teacup. I know, but I can't blame you for that. Maisie smiled. She slowly drank her tea and changed the topic. Have you found a job since you came back? Well, the entertainment company is in a hurry to hire a stylist. I went for an interview, and I passed, he said with a smile. I'll start officially in a few days. She asked, which entertainment company? Zester. Maisie sneered. I thought you would choose Royal Crown. He looked down. Royal Crown is a company owned by my cousin-in-law, but I still want to try working at other companies. Maisie looked at him. That's not a bad idea. If you do well in other companies, it doesn't matter where you go. I believe in you. Then she stood up. Have you had breakfast? Do you want to grab breakfast together? Sure. Maisie drove to a high-end restaurant. She had reserved a seat by the window in advance. When they arrived, the waiter brought them to their seats and handed them the menu with both hands. After they ordered and the waiter left, Maisie looked at him. Was it difficult for you when you were all alone overseas?